They haven't replied in 2 hours. So you've already had the argument, already imagined the confrontation, already rehearsed what you'd say, what they'd say back, how it would end. You've grieved the relationship, planned your exit, decided what this silence means about you, about them, about the whole thing. And then they text back. Sorry, was in a meeting. What's up? And the entire architecture of disaster you just built collapses because it was never real. Welcome to Thought Paradox. Today we're going somewhere slightly uncomfortable because the first step to breaking this pattern is being honest enough to admit you have it. Let's be precise about what we're talking about, because this isn't simply worrying. Worry is about real possibilities, real uncertainties, things that might actually happen. What we're talking about is something different. It's the construction of an entire emotional reality, complete with characters, conflict, and resolution, based on almost no actual evidence. Psychologists call one version of this catastrophizing, the tendency to take a small, ambiguous signal and fast-forward it to the worst possible outcome. But there's another layer that doesn't get discussed as often. It's not just imagining the worst, it's investing in it, emotionally inhabiting it, feeling the feelings of the imagined disaster as if it were already happening, the grief before the loss, the anger before the betrayal, the loneliness before the abandonment, all of it experienced in full for something that hasn't occurred, and in many cases, never will. There's a term in cognitive behavioral therapy called cognitive distortion, a pattern of thinking that consistently misrepresents reality. Problem creation is one of its most sophisticated forms, because it doesn't feel like distortion. It feels like preparation, like intelligence, like you're simply seeing what's coming before everyone else does. And sometimes, you are. But more often, you're writing a story, casting people in roles they never auditioned for, and then reacting to the performance. Let's get specific, because this pattern wears many faces. 1. The unanswered message. Someone doesn't reply quickly enough, and within minutes, sometimes seconds, a narrative begins. They're pulling away. They saw the message and chose not to answer. Something has shifted. You said something wrong last time. They're losing interest. This is how it starts to end. All of this, from a notification that hasn't appeared yet. The message arrives. Everything was fine. But you spent 40 minutes in a reality that never existed. 2. The imagined argument. You need to have a difficult conversation with someone, but before you have it, in your head, multiple times, every possible version. You anticipate their reaction. You prepare your counter. You feel the defensiveness, the hurt, the frustration, yours and theirs, in vivid emotional detail. By the time the real conversation happens, you're already exhausted from a fight that never occurred. And sometimes, the anticipation changes how you show up. You come in guarded, slightly cold, defensive before anything has been said, and the other person feels it, responds to it. And suddenly, the imagined conflict starts to become real, not because it was inevitable, but because you summoned it. 3. The meaning machine. Someone's tone was slightly off today, that's all. A slightly different tone. But the meaning machine activates immediately. What did that mean? Are they upset with you? Did you do something? Is this the beginning of a shift? Should you ask? But asking might make it weird. So you'll watch, analyze, compare today's tone to last week's, build a case. By the end of the day, you have a full psychological profile of what's happening in this relationship, based entirely on a tone of voice that may have had nothing to do with you at all. They were probably just tired. 4. The preemptive exit. This one is quieter, more painful. You're in something good. A relationship, a friendship, an opportunity. And it's going well. Genuinely well. And that's exactly when the problem creation accelerates. This won't last. Something will go wrong. It always does. Better to start preparing now. Better to start pulling back a little. Better to not get too comfortable. And so you begin to leave before you've been asked to. You create distance in something that was close. You manufacture problems in something that was working. Because the alternative, staying fully present in something good that could be taken away, feels more dangerous than ruining it yourself. At least this way, you're in control of the ending. 5. The evidence collection. You have a theory about a person, a situation, a relationship. Maybe the theory is, they don't really care about me. And now, unconsciously, automatically, your brain begins collecting evidence for that theory. Every canceled plan, every short reply, every moment they seemed distracted. Filed, cataloged, added to the case, while simultaneously dismissing the counter-evidence, the times they showed up, the effort they made, the moments that didn't fit the theory. Because the brain doesn't want balance, it wants to be right. And so the problem, which may have started as a feeling, a fear, a ghost of a past experience, becomes, through evidence collection, something that feels like fact. Now here's where we stop calling it out and start understanding it. Because nobody creates problems for fun. Nobody chooses to suffer through imagined disasters when they could be at peace. There's always a reason. And it's almost always rooted in something real. Control. Uncertainty is one of the most uncomfortable states a human being can occupy. And for people who've experienced real loss, real betrayal, real moments where everything changed without warning, uncertainty doesn't feel neutral. It feels like the prelude to pain. So the mind does something ingenious and destructive at the same time. It eliminates the uncertainty by deciding what's going to happen. Even if what it decides is terrible, at least it's known. At least there's something to prepare for. At least the not knowing is over. Creating the problem is a way of taking control of a situation that feels uncontrollable. Protection. If you've already grieved the loss, already felt the abandonment, already processed the ending, then when it actually comes, it won't hit as hard. That's the logic. Unconscious, but real. Pre-suffering as insurance against future suffering. The problem is that the future suffering often doesn't come, and you've paid the emotional cost anyway, in advance, for nothing. Familiarity. For some people, and this is the hardest one to hear, chaos is more familiar than calm. Problems are more familiar than peace. Not because they want it that way, but because that's what they grew up in. That's the emotional weather they learned to navigate. And so when things are genuinely fine, when there's no problem in sight, the nervous system gets uncomfortable, restless, and begins quietly to manufacture one. Not out of dysfunction, out of a deep, old need to be in a landscape that feels like home. The cost of this pattern is not abstract. It lives in your relationships, in the people who grew tired of being cast as villains in stories they weren't part of, in the connections that frayed not from real conflict, but from the weight of imagined ones. It lives in your body, in the cortisol that flooded your system for a threat that never materialized, in the exhaustion of having fought wars that never happened. It lives in your joy, in every good moment that got contaminated by the anticipation of its ending. Every peaceful day interrupted by the construction of tomorrow's disaster. And most quietly, most painfully, it lives in your relationship with yourself. Because every imagined problem that turns out to be nothing leaves a small residue. I did it again. Why do I do this? What is wrong with me? And that question, asked enough times, becomes its own kind of real problem. This is where most people want the fix, the technique, the 5 steps. But the truth is, there's really one core move, and everything else flows from it. You learn to distinguish between signal and story. A signal is real data, something that actually happened. A tone, a behavior, a pattern over time. A story is what your mind builds on top of the signal. The meaning, the implication, the future it's predicting. Both feel equally real from the inside. That's the problem. So the practice, and it is a practice, not a switch, is to pause at the moment the story begins to build and ask, what actually happened here? Just the facts, just the data, not what it means, not where it's going, not what it says about them or you or the relationship, just what actually, verifiably occurred. Most of the time, the answer is surprisingly small. They took 2 hours to reply. That's it. That's the signal. Everything else, the distance, the shift, the ending, that's the story. And you don't have to live in the story. The second move is to sit in the uncertainty without resolving it. This is harder than it sounds, because the entire purpose of problem creation is to resolve the unbearable feeling of not knowing. Sitting in uncertainty means tolerating that feeling without reaching for a narrative to make it stop. It means saying, I don't know what that tone meant. I don't know why they haven't replied. I don't know how this is going to go. And staying there without building. Every time you do this, every time you resist the construction, you teach your nervous system something new. The not knowing didn't kill me. I don't need a story to survive it. Some of your biggest problems were never real. That's not an insult. That's not a dismissal of everything you felt. Because the feelings were real. Completely, entirely real. The grief was real. The fear was real. The anticipation and the dread and the exhaustion, all of it, real. It's just that the thing causing it wasn't. And here's what that means. You have been suffering, genuinely, deeply suffering, for things that haven't happened, things that may never happen, things that existed only in the architecture of a mind that learned, somewhere along the way, that it was safer to expect the worst than to be caught hoping for something good. That's not weakness. That's a survival strategy that outlived its usefulness. The invitation, not the instruction, the invitation, is to start noticing the moment the construction begins, the moment the signal becomes a story, the moment the not knowing becomes a disaster, and to pause there, not to fix it, not to force positivity, not to pretend the fear isn't real, just to pause and ask, is this actually happening? Or am I building again? I'm Thought Paradox. If this one called something out in you, share it with someone who needed to hear it too. See you in the next one.